The night began like any other. I stood on my back stoop with a chipped mug, watching steam unspool into the summer air as if it could carry my breath away from me. Street lamps threw pools of orange over the asphalt. Somewhere down the block, a television laughed on in the dark. A train moaned in the distance, the sound folding into the small noises of the city. An old dog coughing, a radiator ticking, cicadas trying to drown out the world. It was ordinary in the way the world insists on being. Ordinary when you most want it to be. I had only just moved into this apartment after the divorce, after the quiet years that come after any kind of loss. There was a comfort to the ritual. Kettle, mug, stepping outside to let the air press against my shirt. I like to think these small actions held me together. That first night, something in the river caught the light. A tall silhouette on the far bank, elongated, angular, perched like a man leaning from the shoulders of some impossible coat. At first I thought it was a man on a bridge piling watching the water. Then it turned its head. It wasn't a head, it was a shape, an absence shaped like a face, two pale reflections where eyes should be. A suggestion of wings folding and unfolding, catching the sodium glow like a pantomime. It moved like something that had learned to copy human posture without owning it. I told myself it was a trick of wet metal, or the angle of my coffee steam, or the way my sleep-deprived eyes made monsters of lampposts. I blinked, laughed at myself aloud, and went back inside. The next morning my laptop died mid-save. An important draft evaporated with the flicker of the screen. I cursed at the machine and the sky for different reasons. I looked out the window while the computer rebooted. I wanted the world to be small and stable, the thing I could see still there. On the far bank, between the skeletal trees, the figure stood exactly where I'd seen it the night before. Not a man, not a bird, a dark vertical that ate the light around it. Its eyes were not the reflective thing I'd imagined. They were holes in the dark that seemed to swallow the river's reflection whole. I tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion. Grief. It had been 6 years since the accident. 6 years since the night I'd woken under a red sky and found the world rearranged. My sister's voice still skittered across the back of my mind when I left the kettle on too long. For a long time, I had been careful not to think about that night, precisely because remembering tasted like guilt. Bringing the creature into that room of memory felt like drilling into a healing scab. Small misfortunes followed the sightings like obedient shadows. The light above the kitchen sink blew out. My car alarm went off, and a neighbor found their mailbox dented. Nothing violent, just the sense of friction, of things nudging out of place. Each incident landed like a pebble in a quiet pond. The ripples broadened in my chest. The pattern I tried to ignore put a nagging whisper in my ear. The figure appeared before something went wrong, not always immediately, sometimes an hour, sometimes days, but before. A warning. I told myself that, and for a few nights I slept like someone who had a plan. I would watch for it, and if I saw it, I would double-check the locks, call my sister, unplug the toaster. It was an absurd superstition. I pretended it was nothing until my watch stopped at 3:13 a.m. 3 nights in a row. It was then the messages started. They came as a string of numbers at first, 31313113, sent as a blank text at 3:13 from an unknown number. A voicemail appeared on my phone with the carrier's default hum, then my own voice saying, "Don't go," but in a tone I didn't recognize, flattened, as if recorded through distance. The timestamp was for an hour I was still sitting on my stoop, coffee cooling in my hand. I replayed it until the edges went soft and my skin felt like it belonged to someone else. I thought, for a breath, that I was cracking. I checked the call logs, the metadata. The number was a dead strip of digits from an old prepaid. The voicemail had no header indicating where it had been routed from. My voicemail transcribed nothing but static. That should have been impossible. I had never in my life called myself a warning. I had certainly never recorded it. Yet there it was, a tiny demand from my own voice. The second time I questioned reality happened on a Tuesday when rain made ribbons of the street lamps. The figure stood on the old railroad span across from my building, the one with the paint flaking like rotten skin. It wasn't far now, less than 200 yards. My neighbor, a woman with a barking laugh who always watered her apartment plants at the same time, walked out and crossed the lot. She didn't see it. She laughed, waved at me, and then, when she came back inside, she yelled down at me to ask if my sink was running. Her face when she heard the question was pure confusion, like someone waking from a daydream. "I didn't go outside," she said later, politely offended at my suggestion. "I remember walking toward the railing like a sleepwalker. I remember the rain slicking my hair to my forehead. I looked down at the river and felt my stomach tilt as if the earth had slipped. There, reflected in the black water, was not just the bridge or the sodium bulbs. There was my face, older, drawn, and behind it, the thing. When I looked up, nothing was there. My reflection in the wet glass showed a creature leaning over me, wings like folded knives. I stood there, heart trying to climb its way free of my ribs, and felt absolutely certain that the reflection was more honest than the world. Did that just happen? I asked myself, voice small and stupid. I wasn't sure which that I meant. The thing in the water, my neighbor's absence, the voicemail. By then I had begun to follow the creature, not because I wanted to, not because I believed, but because I couldn't persuade myself to do otherwise. It appeared on the highway embankment and then on the roofline of an abandoned factory. Once it was in the middle distance of a playground, tall and still, as children laughed 2 blocks away, ignorant of the shape's efficacy. Each time I thought it a warning, something would wobble. A shelf would collapse at work. A delivery truck would skid in a minor accident 2 blocks from me. The misfortunes were small at first, annoyances and repairs, but they felt orchestrated. Every wrong note made my ears ache. My mind supplied theories, a prank, a local who'd found a way to stand in silhouette, a neurological event. I began to catalogue my days like a scientist with a fever, sighting, then incident, sighting, then incident. The shape seemed to move closer each week, like tide. It watched me with an attentiveness I found obscene. It didn't hide. It wasn't like the predators I had learned to fear. It wasn't hungry in the ways I understand hunger. It was patient. The pattern deepened into a language. I found myself noticing odd repetitions, the number 13, on license plates, on the bus schedule, on the timer of the microwave, 3 times, always. Red lights blinked in the same staccato. Once, as I walked home under an overpass, a traffic signal above the intersection pulsed red 3 times and then died. For a second the city was a black hole, then all the cars behind me honked, confused. Someone shouted, a bicyclist swore, my knees felt thin like insects' limbs. 2 weeks after the first voicemail, I dreamt of the bridge. It was the same bridge from that night we had been young, a bridge I had told myself, lied to myself, that I had crossed alone. I dreamt of my sister's hand on the door handle, of the smell of wet leather and perfume, of a red light, sharp, surgical, sweeping across the dashboard. I woke with my throat raw and my phone vibrating in my palm. The lock screen showed an incoming call from a number I couldn't place. No voice on the other end, only a low, steady sound like distant wings. I began to suspect the creature was not a predator at all, but some kind of calendar. It marked things, times, places. It showed up at the margins and removed safety from the world like a seamstress snipping thread. I tried to outrun the sense of connection. I told my sister's friends, the ones who lurked on social media like late-night ghosts, that I saw a shape. One of them messaged me a picture taken 6 years ago of the bridge at night, and the figure, standing at precisely the same place I had first seen it. The date on the photo, no, not the photo, but the file, was time-stamped the week before the accident. My hands went cold. The picture had been uploaded months before the world took everything from me. I questioned my mind then, with a clarity like a surgeon's scalpel. Did I create the figure from memory? Was the figure an echo of what I'd already built inside myself, guilt given wings? Or was it the other way around? Had the creature always been there, waiting to be given reason? The creeping certainty arrived as a heaviness in my chest. I began to think in possibilities rather than explanations. One sleep-squinted night, I received a text from an old number, the one my sister used to call from, though she had been dead for years. The message read, "Do not stop for red." I stared at that sentence until the screen burned into my vision. I thought of her in the passenger seat, the night of the accident, the passing red lights. I remembered suddenly a refusal of instinct. I had stopped. I had turned back. I called the number. It rang, and on the third ring I heard a sound I could not place, the rustle of wings close to the microphone. The call disconnected with the polite longing of modern telephony. My hands shook so badly I had to sit, weeks folded in like pages. The figure came at the edges more often, and with it, accidents. A ladder fell in an alley and crushed a taxi's hood. A child slipped and broke a wrist in the park. A power transformer blew and blacked out half the block for an afternoon. Each time my stomach foreshortened with recognition. I had begun to believe the creature was a herald. But belief is a dangerous thing. It fills vacancies in the mind and then asks rent. The inevitability arrived quietly like snow. One morning, the city sent out a notice. The old river bridge, the one I had avoided talking about for years, was set for inspection during the week. A public transit route would be detoured. I opened the email with numb hands. It said the bridge would be closed for maintenance on Saturday. That night at 3:13, my phone lit with a single photo. It was of the bridge, mine, but not from my angle, with a dark shape standing on one of the supports. The file properties showed the photo had been created that afternoon. I had not taken it. The messages hardened into commands. "Go," one text said. "Watch," another. The numbers were always 3:13. The red light blinked 3 times. I told myself I would not go. I told myself I wouldn't give this thing the power of my compliance, but something older than fear sat behind my ribs, remorse perhaps, or a duty twisted into ache. And I found myself walking toward the river on Saturday as the day slid into late afternoon. The bridge smelled like oil and old ironwork. A maintenance crew had left barricades and cones. A single police cruiser idled at the far end, lights off. There were the usual sounds of a city in summer, the distant rattle of a bus, gulls complaining, a child learning how to ride a bicycle. I stood under the overpass and watched the water make a black seam through the world. The figure was on the far support, where rust had eaten the paint. When I looked, it was still. It seemed almost to be waiting with the serenity of something that has patience built into its bones. People came and went, soldiers to their chores. A school bus rumbled past the last corner, a child's laughter a bright thing in the diesel. Haze. I felt myself getting the numbers wrong in my head, 3:13, like a prayer with the syllables misplaced. I thought of the voicemail, the image, the messages. I thought of my sister's face in the small glow between my palms. And then there was a sound like the world being unzipped. It began with a groan. Somewhere on the bridge, a bolt answered a generation of weather with a long, grinding complaint. The maintenance cones did nothing to silence it. People looked up. In the next few Seconds, the bridge made a sound I will carry the rest of my life. A low, marine tearing, metal protesting metal. The traffic light at the intersection beneath flashed red 3 times and died. I heard someone shout. I heard engines die. I heard the bus brakes certify their refusal. The sound of braking filled me, sharp, clean, and the bridge gave. The support where the creature had stood splintered like wood under a blade. Planks and beams took to falling. A sheet of metal folded, and the world tipped. I remember thinking traitorously, first of all that the light had blinked 3 times, then afterwards of the sound like unzipped fabric. The next instant there was water and noise and a smell of corsair oil and rain. I don't remember much of the minutes that follow, only fragments spliced into a film of unbearable clarity. The bus listing like a toy, the child trying to climb toward the windows and then going silent. Men with scarves in their mouths, running as if their lives were not quite real. A woman calling a name that broke the air. My phone was a useless, glowing thing in my palm, and the text threads were a corridor of meaningless digits. The maintenance crew were a thrown scattering of ants. The river swallowed a section of steel, and the rest of the bridge followed like a promise broken. Sirens multiplied like a chorus tuning itself wrong. I ran. I ran to the rubble, to the smell of diesel, to the open mouths of people whose faces had been rearranged into the same expressions as mine. I tried to help because that is what you do when the world is hurting, because muscle remembers morality before the mind does. I pulled at a sheet of metal, my fingers cutting. I heard someone behind me crying my name, and I realized with a cold that wrapped and did not let go that I knew the voice. My hands trembled. When the dust finally thinned and the first orderly waves of emergency personnel arrived, I found myself on the far bank watching the river take its weight. The police tape made pale snakes. There were ambulances, and a man with a bullhorn and a woman who kept saying, "Not yet, not yet, not yet," like a prayer. I sat down on the curb and let the city do its work. My hands were sticky with something that might have been oil or blood. I couldn't tell. Later, in a tent for the shaken, I watched police review footage. On the far support, frozen by a camera's indifferent gaze, the figure stood. It did not move as the bridge began to groan. It did not duck. When steel screamed, did not flinch as people screamed. It tilted its head toward the bus that was thrown into water and remained there, tall as a chimney, and then became a smear of shadow as the camera's lens failed under crackled interference. Later still, an officer would tell me, with the gentle cruelty of language meant to make a thing ordinary, that there was no camera where the thing had been. That would not be true. Someone had the footage. It existed for a while on a private feed, and then inexplicably all the copies were said to be corrupt. I don't know if the creature warned or led, or simply was there because tragedies make places heavier and things collect around them. I keep circling those verbs in my head like predators smell a scent. Warned, led, collected. They don't fit neatly. There are holes in the grammar of what happened. The day after the Gutna, the city shut down the stretch of river with a cordon and a polite press release. They used words like structural, failure, and unexpected compromise. They held cameras at a respectful distance and said the thing was nothing but rumor. I watched the images on the news that evening, graphics of steel stress lines, talking heads in coats. The figure appeared briefly in one distant drone shot like a smear where smoke should be, and then the broadcast cut. The video came back several times with the smear gone. I did not know where the image ended, and my brain began. People asked me, politely, and then more, insistently, about where I'd been that afternoon. I told them in a kind of neutral voice that I had been at home. I told myself that I had stayed because the creature had told me to. I told myself everything that kept guilt from eating me alive. The truth was different. I had gone to the bridge because the number and the voicemail had turned the intangible into something I answered. It is a strange thing to feel like you're the instrument of a catastrophe. It feels stranger to know that you might have been a button at the wrong moment. The videos, the photographs, the testimonies looped in my head until I dreamed the bridge again. This time the figure was closer than I had ever seen it, as if it had crossed the river in the small hours and come to stand outside my window. In the dream, I reached up and touched a wing that was warm and downy, and then there was pain and a sound like a throat letting go. I woke with my hand curled into a fist and my finger bent. There was a crescent of a mark on my palm that was not there the night before. Reality had become like glass. When you tapped it wrong, it vibrated with something indefinite and wild. Twice since the collapse, I found photographs on my phone I had no memory of taking. One showed me standing very close to the creature, only I was smiling in the picture, as if we'd been conspiracy partners. The metadata said the image had been made years earlier, on the night before my accident. I had no memory of it. I played the voicemail again and heard my voice there, thinner now, as if coming through miles of cable. "You taught me how to look," it said. "I do not know whether I made a bargain with that shadow or it made one with me. I do not know whether it saved anyone by warning them or whether its presence is the reason the world unravels. I only know that after the bridge there was less light in the world and more waiting. I know that sometimes when the river is quiet and the city is still, I stand at my window and see a shadow on the far bank, and that something in my chest clenches like a fist. Last night, no. This morning, my phone rang at 3:13. I answered because old instincts are a kind of thread you cannot fully snip. On the other end, there was only breathing and the faint suggestion of wings. Then the line went dead. My reflection in the black screen of the phone looked back at me, and for a second, the shape of the reflection was not entirely mine. A suggestion of something folding and unfolding, where a shoulder should be, a pale that was not the gleam in my own eyes, but two reflections catching something only they could see. I keep telling myself that what I see is the price of memory, that if I'd changed the past, I would have given up some part of myself, whether in exchange or in loss. But the creature's presence has made the future feel like a ledger. Every time it appears, there is a tally. A blink of red light, a number repeated, a voicemail of my own voice, and then the world. Learning to ache. Sometimes when the house is very silent and the city breathes on a delayed clock, I reach for my sister's number in my contacts and press it like a ritual. The call never connects. Once, when I held the phone to my ear, though there was no one on the line, I thought I heard pages turning, followed by two words. "Forgive me." I do not know if those were my memories or messages. I do not know whether the creature is a warning or a herald, a guardian or the hand that nudges. The domino. The only clear thing is what it asked of me: attention, presence, compliance of a different sort. It watched me until I watched back. Then the city rearranged itself while I watched, and we both learned the same terrible grammar. Tonight, the street is cold. The river is a seam of black. The bridge stands as a scar. When I look out, across the water, there is a thinness to the world, like paper held to a candle. Sometimes I think I can make the sound of the bridge failing again in my bones. Sometimes I think that if I had done something, if I had stopped, if I had yelled, if I had held a different breath, the event might have been different. Sometimes I think that is what the creature wanted all along, not to warn or to kill, but to remind someone who had been given a second chance that the world is a ledger and debts are paid, whether you remember them or not. At the edge of my vision, on the far bank, something moves. Not the broad silhouette of before, but a suggestion at the corner of the light, a tilt of head, a folding of wing. It is not quite night yet, and the sodium lamps have not yet begun their slow wash. The thing could be a man in a raincoat, a stray tarp waving, or the memory of those who fell. The rational part of me catalogues reasons. The other part, the part that answers to the low hum in my earbuds and the cold cup on the windowsill, knows that the thing will be there tomorrow and the next day, keeping its counsel. I am left with a sequence of small compulsions. I check the locks, I watch the water, I answer my phone when it calls at 3:13. I press my palm to the cool glass and watch my breath fog the night. The last thing I see before I turn away is the far bank and the figure standing as if carved into the dark. Perhaps it waits, perhaps it keeps tally, perhaps it is me, magnified and made monstrous by everything I couldn't save. Perhaps it will never tell me why it looks the way it does, or why it chooses to speak in light taps and numbers. The bridge will never be the same, the people who died will never come home. And somewhere between my bones and the horizon, a shadow like an accusation watches, patient as winter. I do not know if I deserve forgiveness. I do not know if whatever terror visits us is deliverance or indictment. I only know this. The last light falls on the river, and in it I am sometimes the watcher and sometimes the watched. Either way, the creature blinks 3 times, and the world leans toward the inevitable.